will start with is there are two schools of thought in terms of the growth having slowed down. The fact is the growth has slowed down over 6 consecutive quarters. Now, one school of thought is that short-term shocks such as GST and demonetization are responsible for this slowing down. The other school of thought is the economy was anyway slowing down, and this perhaps exacerbated some of the decline, perhaps for some long-term benefits, as some may argue. Which school do you belong to?
Well, clearly to the latter. And,
okay.
And also, although the data are perhaps not comparable, I do want to point out that the peak growth came about 13 quarters ago. And my own way of looking at it is that the last 2 years of the UPA had begun to see a deceleration because of various factors, and that sort of got transformed into the downswing of a business cycle, if you like. And that has now continued, so far, and it got impacted by the two big shocks that the system got, which is demonetization and the GST. And any economy in the world would therefore show some impact of that shock. I think, in fact, the Indian economy has shown greater resilience than what I would have expected, and that this downswing is now bottoming out, and and July is the period when I think the upturn has begun actually, and would have begun. Although we don't have the data, but would have begun.
See, I mean, I didn't want to indulge in 2020 hindsight analysis on what the causes were. We were going to focus on what should be done, but this was important to know which school, because what should be done really depends on which school one belongs to, right? So if you do belong to the latter school, then you do agree that there can be policy measures that can be taken to provide a fillip to growth, even if, as you say, the growth is reviving. Perhaps there can be a few things that can be done to provide a fillip to growth. And maybe we can talk about that.
Sure. Praveen, just a couple of other things is, one, I should point to some, as it were, green shoots, which prompt me to say this.
Okay.
The PMI in manufacturing hit its lowest in July at 47. It recovered 51 point something in August. PMI in services was 47 again, and it recovered to 49 in August. You found that the automobile sales have now increased 8%. Civil aviation is up 16% year on year, the previous year. And finally, I think even the sale of heavy commercial vehicles, which is very often considered to be a strong lead indicator, have started improving in India, in the country. So these are the reasons why I think that the growth has bottomed out. Also because the first quarter, April to June, saw a lot of destocking because of the GST measures. And I think now that would have ended, and so we are turning up. That's one. And the second thing that I do want to say is that, yes, we want to give fillip to growth. But perhaps more importantly, we want to give fillip to employment generation.
Okay. Yeah.
That has been the Achilles heel of the economic growth for the last 7-8 years actually, and that's what is beginning to make a greater noise in the economy than just the GDP growth.
Sure, and that's a larger problem in itself, as you would contend. But if we have to, so if we agree that there can be something done to provide fillip to growth and employment, then what are some of the things? And before we get into that, I thought maybe let's look at what's actually holding up in the economy and what's perhaps not holding up, so that we can talk about what can be done potentially. Clearly, what's holding up is it's only us that seem to be thinking that the economy is in doldrums, because the foreign investors doesn't share that view clearly, right?
No, it's a great India story is still holding up hugely abroad. In fact,
why do you think that's the case?
And I think we are just being terribly impatient.
Okay.
And one, I think we perhaps by nature are pessimistic, or if you like, or Cassandras, because you can see it in the FDI flows. They've been the highest, and I think the cumulative flow in the last 4 years or 3 years is about $256 billion.
Yeah, that's right.
Therefore, our reserves are up.
Yeah.
Our rupee, unfortunately, is appreciating.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about
as a result of that.
Yeah.
So, and if you go anywhere abroad, you will find that India is a good investment story. But our private sector investment, the domestic investment, has not picked up in line with that.
But the big conundrum, Rajiv, is exports. I mean, exports has just been inexplicable in terms of its decline. It's as a share of GDP, I think it's at historic lows. Certainly, private investment. Private investment is not picked up. We are seeing those in bank credit to industry and credit flows to industry. That's been at record lows. Agriculture, manufacturing, you talked about employment, construction, mining, all of them on a GVA perspective have slowed down, have started to slow. So private consumption was holding up, but even that is starting to slow. And these are numbers. And so, perhaps some of the pessimism comes from, reading some of these numbers.
Praveen, I think, you raised a whole host of issues.
Yeah, and we'll go through each one, yeah.
And I think we need to go through each one because there is no generic answer.
Correct, I completely agree.
Example for exports.
Yeah.
They declined over 2014, 15 and 15, 16, but have risen over 16, 17.
Yeah.
And for the last 12 months, they have seen an anemic, but nonetheless a positive growth. Yeah, and so their non-petroleum exports are below the peak in 2013, I think.
2013,
but nonetheless, for the last 12 months have shown a consistent increase. Now, this is, and now that the global trade scenario is picking up, I hope we will improve. And you know that NITI Aayog has set up a task force on employment and exports just for this.
Yeah.
And there was just one line is that what we are finding is that you need far more granular policy support than a generic one-size-fits-all or a sort of like a hammer to swat a fly. And therefore, we are going into sector-specific issues to see how that can be.
Sure. That's so we'll talk about
that's one part of it. The second part of it, you talked about the investment slowdown. I agree, but nonetheless, you must. You are more than anybody else would know that a part of the credit offtake from the bank has been substituted by greater bond markets. The corporate bond markets have probably raised about close to 8,000-9,000 crore, or more actually.
Yeah.
So so that there has been a substitution, and the credit slowdown, credit offtake, I think is largely confined to public sector banks. The private sector banks, the new ones like the HDFCs and the ICICI, they've actually continued to go quite smartly.
Small share of
that is true. That is true.
Yeah.
And there, I think again, the banking sector problem, is something that we need to look at as to why it has, why was it precipitated?
Yeah.
Or could it be avoided by re-looking at some provisioning norms, or by re-looking maybe at the insistence on trying to get to Basel plus 3, Basel 3 plus 1.
Yeah.
So that's the investment cycle in the story.
Yeah.
And finally, on the consumption, yes, it has begun to weaken, but if my hypothesis is correct, it should have picked up now after July.
Yeah, and there are some other things along with private consumption, which is in terms of now will we see a shift of NPAs to the retail sector? And all of those. I think those are some of the issues that we'll talk about. We'll talk about in detail. But, I just wanted to lay out, what's a few things that are holding up and a few things are not holding up. Also, a lot has changed structurally. Whether we like it or not, GST is a reality. Inflation targeting is a reality. Monetary Policy Committee is a reality. Bankruptcy Code is a reality. We have to operate in this environment from a policy perspective, which was not the case earlier. So in that sense, it's unique. Don't you agree?
Qualitatively different.
Absolutely.
But which is also qualitatively a new foundation for a higher, more sustainable growth trajectory.
Sure.
And which hopefully will be devoid of the ups and downs, the yo-yo effect that we've had in the economy in the past.
Yeah.
So I think a new political economy, a new institutional structure for growth in the country. Also, much greater. You forgot to add much greater formalization. As pushed by both demonetization and GST. So that. But additionally, we must make note of a rather turbulent international environment. I'm not saying that they're down, etc. But the change in the technology, the structural changes because of Industry 4.0, the artificial intelligence, the robotics, the reshoring. So the global environment has become far more uncertain for the domestic investor and the domestic exporter.
That is something we can't control, though.
You can't control, but it is different.
Sure.
And it takes getting used to. And I think that's what you're seeing. Therefore, that in both domestically and globally, the Indian investor is caught in a completely new game, the rules of which he or she is beginning to understand but not yet come to grips with.
No, I agree. And you mentioned structural reform, Rajiv. So there is a clamor for factor market reforms, especially the elephant in the room really is talks of fiscal stimulus and versus structural factor market reforms. But sometimes as economists we kind of tend to be a little idealistic. We have to operate in a political economy context, right? And my favorite quote is this president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, who said, we as politicians know what to do. We just don't know how to get re-elected once we've done those.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
So factor market reforms, yes, but we have to operate in a political economy context where we need solutions to work in the immediate term.
And and I learned it. I learned it on the job because when I joined the government in 1989 and then 1991 in the Ministry of Finance in the midst of all that crisis going on, and I learned there that the first best exists only in the textbooks. This is all policy making has to be done in a second best scenario, and that is what the reality is. And second best, unfortunately, a lot of us don't understand that the fact, and we keep citing first best conditions. For example, I don't go as far as saying that there is no free competition or there is no fair market out there. Some people have argued and written about it, but nonetheless, it's clear that there is a policy. You cannot make the perfect the enemy of the good.
Good. So in such a second best situation, some of the broad ideas in terms of what can be done, right? Fiscal stimulus, bank recapitalization, exchange rate, lower interest rates. These are some of the broad ideas that are being thrown out, discussed, all of that. But those are still very broad. I thought we'll just dig deep down. And in fact, sometimes maybe go sector by sector and then talk about some of these big, stimulus versus bank recapitalization versus exchange rate and all of that. The thing that is not talked about very often, at least in our circles, is agriculture. The fact is agriculture growth has been tepid. Again, you could talk about structural changes in agriculture, irrigation, APMC reforms, electronic all India market and all of that, but those things take time. Are there something immediate in the short term that can be done? I mean, DBTs, direct benefit transfer and food and subsidies, Ashok Gulati has been arguing about that.
I have to say to begin with that we have trapped ourselves in agriculture, in a low productivity, low income, sort of low growth syndrome. And that's because we are refusing to tackle the central issue, which is the land holding size, the size of land holdings, which does not permit, so therefore this government has come up with, as you know, the model land leasing law, which 2 states have now adopted and another 4 are about to do, which will assure the owner, the farmer, that his land is safe even if he sort of leases it out to others. So, and I think that's where the Prime Minister's call for doubling farmers' income by 2022 may seem, sort of say, well, how can it be achieved, etc. But the point
mathematically is that, it seems impossible.
Yes, but the point is that I think what I think he means by that is to say that we need to completely modernize our agriculture. It's marketing, it's logistics, it's productivity, and the fact that you can get scalar effects in agriculture as well. So the immediate thing that we can do right away is I think one, to think about transferring fertilizer subsidies directly to the poor and marginal farmer. And that can be done through the DBT. They'll help a lot. And the second one I think that you could do is to remove export bans from agriculture yesterday. Because that then will connect our markets to the global markets and give the farmer the ability to sell and make and earn profits when they can. And I keep saying
even at current exchange rates.
Even at current exchange rates. Even at current exchange rates, because India is fairly competitive in most of these products. And I continue to say, and I've said it for some time, please treat agriculture as a tradable product. It's not a non-tradable strategic product. So that when you have shortages, you can anticipate them and you can import the thing. So therefore, there is a better style of agricultural management that this government can take, and that can start very quickly. And finally, I am trying out now a few pilot projects where I want to bring in private players to work with the farmers to aggregate the land and bring the new technology and economies of scale, which will raise their incomes to a higher level.
So the land holding is a little bit of a longer term, more contentious. So the clear two suggestions that you're saying is direct benefits transfer in fertilizer subsidy and export.
And removing export
and export. And of course, there's also talk that there is, leakage, and Fasal Bima Yojana could be working better. Some of those efficiency gains are there to be had.
But the fact is that these schemes are now in place. So you got the soil, card for the first time. You got the, Fasal Bima Yojana. You got, the Pradhan Mantri Sinchai Yojana. So these are, and finally, you got better mobility through Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, and better power distribution through electrification of the villages. So things have happened which will put hopefully agriculture out of this trap that it is that's caught, along with some others that I mentioned.
And if nothing of these works, double down on Manrega?
No, I don't think so. I don't think Manrega is not an answer. Manrega is a safety net, which I would rather not use.
Unemployment insurance.
Unemployment insurance. At 160 rupees a day, you can't go very far in this way.
Okay, so clearly two specific ideas. So now let's come to exports, and that's one of your. So exports, the fact is the real effective exchange rate is up 11 to 12% since this government took over. Yeah. So that's indisputable. That's numbers. Now, how much of this increase in the exchange rate in the rupee has hampered exports? That's an econometric question. We're not going to get into that. But exports is also declining quite rapidly. What are some of the ideas that can be done? And currency, RBI has been intervening, by the way, right, in the last few months.
You see, it has been, and I want to say with all the sort of emphasis on my command that we need to switch the Indian businessman from a domestic market player to a global market player. And that can happen only and only when we assure to the Indian businessman that our rupee will not appreciate.
So guarantee a rear, right?
To not appreciate for the next 5 years, as it were. Because that's the only way to turn them around. Because the pull of the domestic market is so large. We were just discussing it today. That most exporters will say, most businessmen will say, oh, we don't want to get into the whole trouble of the exporters. So the first thing is
it's a mindset.
The mindset, but can only change through an incentive structure, which comes about by changing the underlying exchange rate regime that you've got, and you have to assure them that you get, and I think you probably agree that Michael Spence's report did point to a depreciated currency as one of the key conditions for all economies that have achieved sustained 10% growth rate for 30 years. That report that he did.
Absolutely.
And the second one, and the second one for exports is trade facilitation. Which is,
But on the exchange rate itself, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that. So one is why if you want to guarantee a currency stability to exporters, there are costs associated with it, right? I mean, there are costs that we have to bear. So costs certainly for imports. I mean, today we're lucky because oil is at where it is, even though it's gone up to 60. Oil is where it's at record lows. But there are certainly costs for depreciating rupee. Do you think the benefits will outweigh the costs?
Far benefit, far more. And there is this assumption that somehow people are making that our imports are inelastic. Our imports are price inelastic. I don't accept that at all. And perhaps, for example, in this case, given the Prime Minister's insistence on import substitution in energy, which he keeps talking about all the time, I think if you got a depreciated rupee, which made your energy costs higher, you would get both a lower consumption, less wastage, but also a nice kick towards producing your own domestic renewables and other sources that you can achieve. So I think I'm convinced in my mind that, but also because the encouragement to export means greater employment. there's no doubt about that.
Especially textiles and footwear.
Textiles, garments, handicrafts, agro-processing.
Yeah.
You talk about it,
Yeah.
and we have not done enough, for that. And pardon my saying it, but I think our exchange rate policy, in some sense, is a very elitist policy. It benefits those who have got large share of import goods in their consumption basket, and it discourages those who want to generate employment. And I think we must change it as soon as possible. And here, I think the RBI is in charge of that.
Yeah.
And I hope some people in RBI listening to our conversation and see the merit of this argument.
Yeah, and though they're worried about inflation targeting at this point in time, but exchange rate is certainly one part of the trinity. And then, so then you would be talking about trade barriers and trade facilitation agreements. I know that keeps coming up, right? That keeps coming up.
But the facts are amazing. That we take 96 hours on average to clear the cargoes, while in Singapore it takes them less than 24, right? And we've got ourselves a 5-year target to come there. I am saying, why can't we do 48 hours in the next 1 year or 6 months?
Is that possible?
Why not? After all, it's all governance, isn't it?
Is it governance or is it infrastructure?
No, it's a governance. Because now most of your things are on electronic databases.
Sure.
These are talking to each other. I think it's just a matter of getting the right incentive structure there, on our port authorities and our customs and all of that, the rest of the lot, and getting a better coordination there, which can achieve this trade facilitation quite quickly. The other part of it, which is the logistics part of it, is more difficult. Our logistics are far too underdeveloped. Yeah. But that's where also growth will come once you get the export, the foreign trade going.
Okay. So for exports, you're very clear about rupee depreciation and trade facilitation,
and also some more sector-specific granular policy support, identifying the critical constraints, on that. I heard, for example, that we in garments, you'll may be surprised to know that maybe about 80% of our garment exports are concentrated only in ladies' dresses and blouses, etc.
Right, that's right.
So we don't do any men's suits, men's suits or outerwear, and none, pretty much almost zero, of synthetic fiber-based sportswear, etc. And that's because our import duties on synthetic fiber is 11.5–12%. It's 0.5% in Sri Lanka. Now, so therefore, any garment which needs imported material is pretty much out of our export scenario. Now, that's the sort of thing that we can say.
On textiles, we are losing market share rapidly to Vietnam, Bangladesh, and countries like that. But yeah, point taken. So you clearly have outlined two specific ideas for exports. Now, let's move to private investments. The NPA bugbear. So we do have the bankruptcy court, and I believe, as economic theory would tell us, first and foremost, it's a good signal.
Yes.
That we have a bankruptcy regime today is a good signal, and I actually think it's showing up in bond markets. Bond market confidence is sometimes can be ascribed somewhat to a bankruptcy regime, but that's not going to solve our stock of NPAs in the time frame that we want. So the simple question is, this was always known, Rajiv. This was known for 3 years. Why were we shy of tackling this, you think?
Well, Praveen, I think it was not. It began to be known for 3 years. That process has taken, actually, it's only in the last 1 year or so that the enormity of the issue, the enormity of the problem has really come up, in some cases, right? That some of our public sector banks are sitting with more than 20% or so NPAs, and their net worth is wiped out, etc., etc.
Because of that asset quality review that we got done.
Yeah, but I think the asset quality review, pardon my saying it, but maybe was a bit too harsh.
Yeah.
And
I know there's that school of thought.
And second, and especially I say that especially because there were a lot of projects there which were dependent on government payments and receipts from government departments, which were delayed inordinately, and that then made those made those projects in some sense unviable, financially unviable.
But if I'm a creditor, why should I care?
No, if you're a creditor, why should you care? That's all right. But the point is that if you're a public sector bank creditor,
so right and left hand.
Yes. So why not, Baba? I mean, this is something that you could have done, and you could have had a different treatment for those NPAs, which are dependent upon government payments. So that's one part of it.
Okay.
The second part of it, that 70% of your bank is sovereign guaranteed. So it's not going away anywhere. I mean, it's not as if you're going to get a bank run tomorrow.
Sure.
So that also meant to me that this whole 360-degree asset quality review and repeated, etc., etc. I'm not for a minute supporting evergreening of loans, etc., etc. Those who are willful defaulters should be punished, should be given exemplary punishments, as has been done in some cases. And now with the bankruptcy code, take them, drag them there. But there is a large number of people who were probably in a situation to get on to the, to be able to get back to, in the black, which we have forced banks to push in the red. I mean, the latest that I read, was it an order from SEBI that said that if you're overdue by a day,
you have to report.
Hello, I mean, what's so that.
So you don't think it's a good idea?
Do you? I mean, but and just let me just complete that sentence, which is that I think it's time now for us to be a little more nuanced. In our situation. And second, it's also time to take the bull by the horns, accept that there is a problem here, and recapitalize the banks.
Recapitalize it.
And improve the allocation, budgetary allocation of rupees 10,000 crore by a factor of
10.
Well, yes, I mean, you said it, but but the point is that whatever is needed.
Sure.
Because
and how we get the money for it, we'll talk about later.
But do my sentence is do whatever is needed. To get that thing off the off your problem book. Because otherwise there's nothing that can happen.
Sure. So bite the bullet, increase budget allocation. That's on NPAs. But we're talking about private investment. The other big clamor is for interest rates. The fact is, I mean, and there, I actually don't subscribe to this call for lower interest rates. Maybe we disagree there, but
why don't you subscribe?
My simple argument is this. Repo rates are down 200 basis points, 8% to 6% since this government took over.
In the last 3 years.
Yeah, the last 3 years, right? That is, I mean, clearly private investment is still down. Where is the evidence that interest rates, I mean, I'm presenting a counterfactual to you, and I'm saying it's down 200 basis points. If anything, private investment has only gone down further and further in terms of credit flows. So why are we holding up interest rates as the villain in this?
Well, one, I think it's a signaling argument. Which is that what will the government do to revive private investment? How far will it go, as it were? And according to our friend Surjit Bhalla, it's also an argument to say that accept your mistake that you got your inflation expectations all wrong, and therefore don't punish the innocent because you think there's some hidden guilt, as it were. So that's the one part of it.
And the
second part of it is, I think, there I would agree that is not, maybe the interest rate cut is a condition, may not be a necessary condition, but it's not certainly a sufficient condition. And the sufficient condition is for us to create the demand for credit in the economy. If you talk to the bankers, they would say, we are willing to lend, but where are the projects? Where is the investment demand? And that is for two reasons. One, as we know, for 3 or 4 years, we've suffered with excess capacity. There's under capacity utilization in the system, and therefore if you're sitting with that, and if your output gap is positive and large, of course there won't be any investment demand. But the second thing is, this is where I've argued for the government coming in with large infrastructure, low gestation projects, which on an EPC basis, which will in some sense revive the investment climate and get some of the large companies to begin demanding credit on viable projects. I mean, just give you one example, affordable housing. Let's say, if you want to build,
Though I think all housing is affordable to someone at some point. It's a low-cost housing.
Low-cost. Touche. Low-cost housing, 30 square meters, for which the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana gives us a subsidy. That one, if you de-risk that project, by acquiring land and getting all the approvals, etc., etc., and you say that you want to build 100,000 houses in somewhere, and then invite private bidders, the same builders, and they come in, they will then go to the bank to get the working capital.
Sure.
And that will then, get the demand going, the credit demand going. And once you got that, and then all the 200 multipliers start working, and you got you've got a priming of the economy, not through just pushing up consumption demand, but by actually improving investment climate.
So, stimulate demand through sector-specific policies, yes, that can be a discussion itself. So then you do agree that interest rates being held up as this villain is perhaps a bit unfair then?
I'll grant you that.
Okay.
But just with one caveat, that any good, efficient policy meant for reviving the economy has to walk on two legs.
Sure.
It has to be both monetary and fiscal.
Sure.
And this whole, in my view, nonsense of this against the other, and this is one, is just that much. So therefore there is a time now for the Mint Road and North Block to work together, work closely together and in tandem, and figure out what is needed to be done, so that on the one hand there is a better transmission of the interest rate cut, there is a greater supply response, and there is the fiscal, and they are in sync, as it were, and rather than working against each other.
So independence of the central bank is some la-la land concept, according to you?
Independent, but independent, of course. I mean, but working in close coordination, that can be achieved.
Okay.
I mean, even if you're independent, I mean, why should it be that if you're independent, then you have to be in opposition?
Absolutely.
Independence doesn't mean opposition.
You don't have to be confrontational if you're independent.
You don't have to be confrontational.
I agree.
So that's what it is.
Yeah.
So you are a part of the government.
Sure.
And you're a part of the policy making team.
Not the Monetary Policy Committee.
Okay.
Okay. So then, the other thing, lower corporate taxes. This has been, as you know, a demand from industry. You perhaps have made it yourself when you were on the other side.
Yes.
Of course. What is your view? I mean, in terms of lowering corporate tax rate from 30% to 25%, is that enough to stimulate private investment and demand for credit?
In any case, it will be effective only in the long run.
Yeah.
There's not something that's happening that will affect it today, and that the effective corporate tax rate is no more than 22%.
Exactly.
So therefore that
for
demand,
those that pay taxes,
those who do pay taxes. So therefore that demand is a little bit again unfair.
Yeah.
Because if you are paying 22%, what is it that you want to do more? If you want 25% with continued exemptions, that's just not right.
Yeah.
What you want here actually, Praveen, is to greatly reduce the tax burden.
You mean administration?
Administration. What I'm trying to say is that the worst thing here is that those middle and not small, but the next 1,000, the kind of tax, sorry to use the word, the tax terrorism that they face is what has got us into this.
No, are you referring to the GST regime?
No, I'm referring to the direct tax regime.
Yeah, okay.
I'm referring to the corporate direct tax regime. The tax administration needs to be far more taxpayer friendly, and yet insisting on compliance. And I think the two are not incompatible. That can be done, and I think it's time for us to take some very major reform efforts on the CBDT.
The direct tax code.
The direct tax code, yes, bring that in. But more than that, get that incentive structure for better governance and better and more and less rent seeking in the CBDT, which is harassment. I mean, that's the word I was looking for.
Sure.
So that tax harassment, especially for the smaller and medium enterprises, which then creates an environment where businessmen don't feel in some sense wanted. That I think needs to be changed very quickly.
So for private investment, clearly bank recapitalization, NPAs, bite the bullet. Tax harassment, go easy, make it more tax friendly. Third, stimulate demand. And since you've granted me the interest rate argument, so I'm not going to put that as a suggestion.
Stimulate investment demand through larger public capital expenditure, such that there is a vigorous crowding in effect.
Yeah.
Which is today, I think, would happen right away because given where we are.
Okay. So let's move to personal consumption then. Personal consumption has been robust, but it is starting to show signs of slowing down.
The rate of growth of personal consumption expenditure this year now has been 6.8% as compared to 9.8 in the earlier average. So it has slowed, and which is ominous in some sense.
Because that was one strong engine of growth. What can be done on that other than lower income tax rates even further, you think? I mean, I have argued that we already have very high income tax thresholds, exemption thresholds.
I think so. That's where interest rate would work. You get the lower EMI. You get the lower EMI on your housing. You get the lower EMI on your cars and consumer durables. Straight off, there is an impact. And so that's one thing that you can do right away. The second thing that I think you can do is to give direct subsidies for employment generation. Now there is a scheme in Jharkhand, for example, where I've just found out this today that the government has announced that they would give 5,000 rupees per month per worker to every employer who goes beyond 100 employees. In the textile industry.
Okay, I remember.
And this will be 6,000 if the person concerned is from scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, or women. So that's the Jharkhand scheme.
Though a large percentage of textile workforce is informal.
Is informal, but you could extend that to the informal, because this is not related to the payment on ESI and EPF, which the textile policy, the union textile policy had, and for which reason it didn't work. But this doesn't make a distinction between formal and informal. Odisha has a similar scheme. Now, why can't this be extended today across the board, if you like, for everybody? Saying that if you expand your employment beyond what you had, let's say, at the end of August 2017, the government will give you that much money.
Some sense like the Apprenticeship Act that Germany has, right?
Absolutely, and we have an Apprenticeship Act. We have an Apprenticeship Act. I believe, and I'm looking into it at the moment, that there are a couple of points, which have prevented its better utilization. But I have been arguing that some amount of money that you spend on skill development should actually be transferred to apprenticeship. Because when you give apprentice, when firms take on apprentices, they are taking you in places and in jobs where they need you tomorrow. While very often the skills that you generate could be the skills for yesterday. And maybe that is one reason why the uptake, the placement of skilled workers has been less than 10%. And that actually aggravates the situation. Because having got the skill,
expectations are higher.
Much higher.
That's true.
You see, so therefore, I think you're absolutely right. A huge expansion of the apprenticeship scheme is called for today.
Okay. So now government spending.
Yes.
The fact is, government spending has been growing at 2.5 times nominal figures, the nominal GDP. It is already, some would argue, that we were already on a stimulus package, right? With oil where it is, and government spending being extraordinarily high. And as you know, at least in the first 4 months, we are already at 92% of the targeted deficit. How much more can the government spend?
Well, what I noticed was that the government expenditure the growth in government expenditure has slowed down from previous year, last year, this year. I mean, I think it was 16.2 and 9.8 this year.
On a real basis?
On a real basis. So that's gone down. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is that I don't want to give a number, but I do want to say, and I emphasized this earlier, that the FRBM, the fiscal target, is a self-imposed punishment on yourself. And you want to tie yourself hand and foot for this, because I've insisted even to the NK Singh committee that you should focus much more on the revenue deficit than on the fiscal deficit. Because if you are going to use your borrowing for capital investment and for productivity enhancing investment, I cannot see anybody objecting to that. Now the question that you asked is a very valid one as to how much more. I mean, you outlined something yourself, which is recapitalization, which are some very large infrastructure projects. Then there's low-cost housing. If you do those, and then you see, and then there'll be some roads and highways. if you're going to do that, then of course
it's
inevitable, and you come up with whatever number you come up. But more importantly today, there are a large number of ministries in our government who are the spending ministries, like rural development and housing and urban housing, highways, etc. Highways is an exception here, but there are others, power and shipping and skill and so on, who have not spent what their budget allocation has been.
Exactly, I was just going to come to that.
So why not first get that money out of the door?
The absorptive capacity of the economy for increased government spending is just not there.
I don't think so. I beg to disagree, because I think the absorptive capacity can be created by your governance, by some steps that you need to take. As I told you, in the case of housing, and that can apply to a lot of others, which is that if you are going to be innovative enough to de-risk your projects, and then invite the private sector, and not take the attitude that these private sectors are going to make make a lot of money, so I'm not going to let you go in. You have to just change that mindset. You have to think of the private sector as your partner to take the economy along. I mean, in this case, the
PPP. You're going back to PPP.
No, PPP in a real sense. PPP not in inviting hybrid equity bids. PPP not inviting BOT. No, PPT in the manner that, look, we are partners. I am going to do the spade work for you. I'm going to de-risk the project.
Okay.
Come and take this on and get on with it. Now there are lots of places where you can do that. The Chinese have been so pragmatic at that. They've completely eliminated the distinction between public and private.
Surely, I mean,
you just don't know where one begins and the other ends. Why can't we do that?
You think so?
Why can't we?
State capitalism in some sense?
I mean, there is the state capital. Call it what you may like.
Sure.
But the point is, I must quote Deng. It doesn't matter what the cat is, the color of the cat is. You want to get the employment generated and the growth going.
Okay.
Why should you be hung up on these ideological things that whether it's state capitalism or crony capitalism is bad.
It's bad.
So we don't want to go there. But you do what it takes to get the absorptive capacity higher.
Okay. So clearly you want a higher fiscal stimulus and
higher fiscal spending.
And we've talked about different projects. Now let's talk about where will we get the money from. Now, I've read estimates that says if, let's say, we spend 1 lakh crores more, the fiscal deficit where we are on target for 3.2% would be at 3.9. That's assuming we get the money and we spend. But first, let's talk about where will we get the money from. And one, not perhaps low-hanging fruit, but certainly something that's not been attempted in earnest is privatization proceeds.
I completely agree.
Given where capital markets are.
And NITI Aayog has submitted a list of, I think, I may not be wrong, probably cabinet approved 23 enterprises that need to be disinvested and privatized. Now, one should see action on that. One should see action on that in this quarter.
Absolutely.
Because the markets are reasonably good.
The markets are on fire. We've only raised 15,000 crores so far.
So why can't we raise, much more than what the budget has stipulated for us in this investment? Why would Air India not be privatized and get, because we in NITI are ready with our second list. We want to get on with it. But then, I have sort of held back for saying that, look, let's have some successes before you do this, because otherwise it just piles on. So that's one part of it. The second is, of course, that I believe a large number of PSUs are sitting with surplus cash.
So dividends, special one-time dividend.
Yeah, why not? We'll give a dividend back. And there has been
especially because RBI has reduced its dividend.
Yes, and half them. But then you mentioned the name. There has been this big conversation about all the reserves that RBI has had. As to why can't that be tapped into at this point of time when you need some more money. Now RBI would tell us that the balance sheet would get struck, etc., etc. But I think we need to again have a conversation, a friendly, collaborative conversation between all sides to figure out as to whether there is some room for the RBI to bail the economy, to sort of bail the budget out in some sense by not getting the fiscal target. All said and done, if you don't meet the target, I'm not going to lose sleep.
Sure, and I want to talk about that. But then, if you do agree that you can raise proceeds through privatization, maybe a one-time special dividend and other things, I actually think anyone's going to begrudge. Even the fiscal hawks are not going to begrudge that. And if, as you articulate, that it will go towards capital spending, then I actually think there is no disagreement between hawks and doves and eagles and all of them, right, in this?
Absolutely right. And if the rating agencies are going to be cussed about it, so be it. They can take the hindmost if you like.
So we'll talk about the rating agencies. So the one fear about breaching the fiscal deficit is rating agencies. Yes, I think no one denies that they have been somewhat unfair to India.
One upgrade in the last 25 years?
Absolutely. One grade below investment grade, right?
And we get $256 billion of private investment.
Absolutely. $400 billion in reserves. Yeah.
$400 billion in reserves. So what are they smoking?
Agreed. Completely agreed. But there is also a feeling, if you breach the deficit, ratings outlook, today which is positive for Moody's, I think S&P and Fitch are neutral, outlook can potentially change, which can then have an impact on flows. Now, you could argue if there is outflows, it's actually better. It may be a blessing in disguise for the currency. But you know what? You don't think that's a problem that we should be worried about?
I don't think that's a problem at all. Because I think, on the other hand, we are almost into a 1994 situation when I was in the Ministry of Finance, where you don't particularly want such foreign capital flows coming in. If they come in, it's okay. But at the moment, if the rupee continues to appreciate, then they've got a double advantage, huge advantage here. You see, so much higher interest rates, a differential of maybe 4, 5, 6% compared to what they would get there.
Sure.
Plus an appreciating currency. So they are laughing their way back to the bank. All the way back to the bank. So here, I think I don't think the outlook will be affected. Be affected. I don't think so. In fact, if now the world investor sees you taking more steps to push growth and employment, I think they will reward you. They will reward you by rushing in here, because as we had discussed right in the beginning, the Indian story is good out there. And the Indian story, they would not, and if the Indian story appears to be becoming better, and if the denominator seems to be increasing, rather than us trying to control the numerator, then I think everybody is going to be I think they'll be more gung-ho about it.
That's actually quite a contrarian view that I've not heard. You're actually saying if fiscal spending and any sort of boost to growth would actually increase foreign investor interest.
I think so. Because I think so simply because I know that investors also look at overall stability of the economy, which includes political stability. After all, every investment bank also has a country risk analyst.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and what is his or her job?
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're looking at it, with hawkish eyes, also to see whether our inability to generate the kind of employment that we need.
What kind of social costs that we will bear for that. Yeah. No, I completely with you on that in that sense. But essentially, then, Rajiv, I think what you're essentially saying is a stimulus is somewhat inevitable to boost spending, right?
Pretty much so. And in that sense, the sooner we can do it, the better. Because, but let me put it like this, that we've discussed all the measures that are needed for that. You may give it the name, whatever you like.
Yeah.
But the fact is that those steps, those measures
need money.
But they need to be taken.
Yeah.
And then it's up to you to see whether they may not necessarily increase the fiscal deficit if you're smart enough. But if they do, you will have to make sure that your revenue deficit doesn't increase. And if the fiscal deficit increases, I do not think that people will punish you for that.
People will punish. Okay. Now, when you say fiscal stimulus is needed, are you putting a condition to it saying the money for that should be obtained through measures such as disinvestment and privatization, or you're not going to tie the two together?
No, I would want this thing to happen.
Sure.
I would very much want greater resource mobilization on the part of the government, because that's
I think we can easily get 75,000 to a lakh crore.
There you go. There you go. And then there is also the possibility that you could recapitalize the bank through bonds.
Yeah,
which,
recapitalization bonds, which is off balance sheet.
Which is off the balance sheet. So,
yeah,
so there you
but
go.
We've done enough off balance sheet stuff, haven't we?
Well, I don't know, but there is, but that's, it's a good thing to look at.
Sure.
So, but yes, but at the bottom line is that you need the economy, you need to give a helping hand to the reviving economy so that it doesn't become too late and it's not too slow. You want that now to gather steam. You want that to be accelerated so that people can then begin to see the benefits of a huge number of reforms, structural reforms, and all the work in progress that has happened in the last 3.5 years to actually bear fruit. And the bearing of the fruit, perhaps the only criteria at the moment, is our young people in better jobs.
Okay. Well, on that note, and we're hoping that the Keynesian multiplier will kick in. But there was one last thing that I couldn't resist, which is, given the recent announcement about another Economic Advisory Council, it reminded me of a story about U.S. President Harry Truman, when he had different economists giving him advice, and one was saying, "Sir, on the one hand you can do this," and then somebody else was saying, "On the other hand you can do this." He's supposed to have said, "Can somebody give me a one-handed economist?" Does Prime Minister Modi need a one-handed economist now?
This Prime Minister has always made it clear that he needs only a one-handed, small-talking economist. So therefore, I fall in the danger of having talked too much. So therefore, I think you've done a great conversation.
Okay,
all policy economists must necessarily be one-handed. There is nothing achieved by telling our political leader that this on the one hand and that on the other. And what good are we there? I think that is the measure of our own worth. And if we can't do it, then I don't think we should be in this business.
Great conversation. And I'm very glad that we actually got down to specifics for each sector, and we identified clearly some of the policy ideas that you thought. So it was very, very
good. Lovely talking to you, and thanks a ton.
Great. Thank you, Rajiv.
Bye for now.